Nutrition science, fatty acid types, and food sources. On the previous week, nutrition science, fatty acid types, and food sources. The main form of fat in the body and in food are made up of glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acids attached. Fatty acids can differ from one another in both carbon chain length and degree of saturation. These characteristics influence the resulting fat in many ways. Chain length of fatty acids. Fatty acids have different chain lengths, typically between 4 and 24 carbons, and most contain an even number of carbon atoms. When the carbon chain length is shorter, the melting point of the fatty acid becomes lower, such as fats found in dairy products, and the fatty acid becomes more liquid. Longer chain lengths tend to result in more solid fats, although melting point is also influenced by the degree of saturation. Degrees of saturation of fatty acids. Fatty acid chains are composed primarily of carbon and hydrogen atoms that are bonded to each other. The term saturation refers to whether the carbon atom in a fatty acid chain is filled or saturated to capacity with hydrogen atoms. In a saturated fatty acid, each carbon is bonded to 2 hydrogen atoms with single bonds between the carbons. Alternatively, fatty acids can have points where hydrogen atoms are missing because there is a double bond between carbons. This is referred to as a point of unsaturation because the carbon is only bonded to 1 hydrogen atom instead of 2. Unsaturated fatty acids have 1 or more points of unsaturation or double bonds between the carbons. A monosaturated fatty acid is a fatty acid with 1 double bond, and a polyunsaturated fatty acid is a fatty acid with 2 or more double bonds. These structures of a saturated, monosaturated, and polyunsaturated fat. Note the differences in points of unsaturation, or carbon-carbon double bonds, on some of the fatty acids. Triglycerides in food contain a mixture of saturated, monosaturated, and polyunsaturated fatty acids, but some foods are better sources of these types of fatty acids than others. For example, coconut oil is very high in saturated fat, but it still contains some monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Peanut oil is often thought of as a good source of monounsaturated fat because that is the predominant fatty acid in the oil. But peanut oil also contains a fair amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids and even some saturated fatty acids. Dietary fatty acids contain a mixture of saturated, monosaturated, and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Foods are often categorized by the predominant type of fatty acids they contain, even though foods contain all 3 types. Saturated fatty acids. Fat sources with a high percentage of saturated fatty acids tend to be solid at room temperature. This is because the lack of double bonds in carbon chains of saturated fatty acids makes them very straight, so they pack together well, like a box of toothpicks. Fats have mostly saturated fatty acids like butter and coconut oil are solid at room temperature, as are the visible fat layers in a strip of bacon or a cut of beef. Consuming a diet high in saturated fats is associated with an increased risk of heart disease because such a diet increases blood cholesterol, specifically the LDL or bad cholesterol level. Food sources of predominantly saturated fatty acids include most animal fats with the exception of poultry and eggs, which contain more unsaturated fatty acids. Dairy products, tropical oils like coconut and palm oil, cocoa butter, and partially or fully hydrogenated oils. Examples of foods high in saturated fat, such as meat and dairy products. Unsaturated fatty acids. Fat sources rich in unsaturated fatty acids tend to be liquid at room temperature because the carbon-carbon double bonds create bends in the carbon chain, making it harder for fatty acids to pack together tightly. Consuming a diet rich in mono and polyunsaturated fats is associated with a lower LDL cholesterol level and a lower risk of heart disease. Food sources of predominantly monosaturated fats include nuts and seeds like almonds, pecans, cashews, and peanuts, plant oils like canola, olive, and peanut oils, and avocados. Fat in poultry and eggs is predominantly unsaturated and contains more monounsaturated than polyunsaturated fatty acids. Food sources of predominantly polyunsaturated fats include plant oils such as soybean, corn, fish, flaxseed, and some nuts like walnuts and pecans. Omega-3, omega-6, and essential fatty acids. In addition to the length of the carbon chain and the number of double bonds, unsaturated fatty acids are also classified by the position of the first double bond relative to the methyl, or CH3, or omega end of the carbon chain, the end furthest from the glycerol backbone in a triglyceride. Fatty acids with the first double bond in the third carbon from the omega end are called omega-3 fatty acids. Those with the first double bond at the sixth carbon from the omega end are called omega-6 fatty acids. These are also omega-9 fatty acids. The position of the first carbon-carbon double bond determines whether an unsaturated fatty acid is classified as omega-3 or omega-6. The two essential fatty acids, linoleic and omega-6, and an alpha-linoleic acid and omega-3 fatty acids are vital for the normal operation of all body systems, but the body is capable of synthesizing most of the fatty acids it needs. However, there are two fatty acids that the body cannot synthesize: linoleic acid and omega-6, and alpha-linoleic acid and omega-3. These are called essential fatty acids because they must be consumed in the diet. Other fatty acids are called non-essential fatty acids, but that doesn't mean they're unimportant. The classification is based solely on the ability of the body to synthesize the fatty acid. Excellent food sources of linoleic fatty acids include plant oils such as corn oil and soybean oil, often found in salad dressings, and margarine. Rich food sources of alpha-linoleic acid include nuts, flaxseed, whole grains, legumes, and dark green leafy vegetables. Most Americans easily consume enough linoleic acid